The morning my mother told me I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding. I was kneeling on the floor of my studio, surrounded by the aftermath of a Vermont shoot, prints everywhere. A cup of black coffee gone to glass and steam. The smell of rain-threaded maple leaves still clinging to the paper. I remember the image that had just made me smile, a bride under a canopy of burning sugar maple leaves, fingers almost touching, the world briefly holding its breath. The phone lit up with Margaret. I hesitated like I always do, because somehow every call from her has the possibility of being ordinary and never is. Courtney, she said, crisp and clinical. We need to talk about Lily's wedding. I thought she'd be excited. I had ideas, sunset portraits on the beach in Miami, low-angle shots catching the fringe of her veil like a halo. I was already arranging layouts in my head. Instead she told me, flat as a verdict, that my presence would overshadow the bride. Don't come, she said. You'll ruin her day. The cup slipped from my hand. The ceramic shattered and coffee smeared across prints I'd been editing for hours. The damage was petty and trivial. It was also emblematic of a lifetime of small violences, art shoved aside to make room for Lily's macaroni drawings on the fridge, my scholarship photos consigned to an overfull shoebox so she could occupy the mantel. The line, "You'll ruin her day," was ridiculous if it came from anyone else. From my mother, it landed like a 10-pound stone. I called my father. He told me, in the voice he uses when he wants to make a thing feel inevitable, that this was for the best. Be selfless for once, he said, as if the only way to prove love was to vanish. Every memory of being sized down flashed through me, thank yous withheld, jokes at my expense, my successes quietly excused. Ethan found me on the floor an hour later, eyes wide with the kind of anger that doesn't need permission. They've done this your whole life, he said simply. And sat down to help salvage the photos that weren't soaked. He blotted, steady and efficient, and somewhere between his hands and a line of heartfelt client testimonials he'd pulled up on his laptop, I realized the story being told about me in my family's living room was fiction. Outside of that house, my work had built lives and memories. Inside it, I was the nuisance. For the next week I tried the old tricks, apology, reasonable explanations, small concessions that used to mollify them. It didn't matter. Invitations were sent with my name omitted, comments whispered into other phones. She's always needed to be the center of attention, a phrase my mother repeated with the kind of moral fastidiousness usually reserved for scripture. I scrolled through photos of Lily's bachelorette party, yachts and cocktails and laughter, and I heard them tell stories about me that never happened. They built an alternate history where I was the villain, the one who needed trimming. Amanda called with the numbers that made it real. Miami, 800,000. White tulip centerpieces flown in from Holland. A celebrity chef. Bradley's family covering most of the cost. Lily had told people I made everything about myself. Bradley had apparently decided, before he'd ever met me, that my very existence would be an embarrassment. You can capitulate to family theater. Or you can do the other thing, the thing that tastes like victory. Ethan's hands on my shoulders felt like a bracing wind. He said two words that would change everything: stand tall. He didn't say it like a pep talk. He said it like a factual observation: you can stop shrinking now. We booked a villa on the Amalfi Coast for September 15th, 1 month before Lily's Miami spectacle. Not a spite wedding flung together in a flurry, but something careful and conspicuous in its authenticity. 25 people who had actually been there for us. Jasmine garlands, olive branches, a small string ensemble playing a song that only mattered to us. Giovanni, a director of documentaries with a villa that had seen countless sunsets and secrets, emailed back with a line I tucked into my pocket like a lucky coin: the house awaits your vision. I didn't tell them. I told no one who would tell them. It felt delicious to hide plans from people who had made a career out of predicting my compliance. I told a handful of friends, colleagues who understood composition and truth. I vetted photographers I respected, videographers who would not vampirize the authenticity for a soundbite. We mapped every frame and practiced leaving space for unguarded moments, the things my lens has always gone after. When my mother found out through family channels, I expected the usual pressure campaign: guilt dressed as concern. The leveraging of sick grandmothers and fragile brides. What I didn't expect was the scale and the automation of it, the calls from cousins, the frantic texts, the neighbors pretending to care. They manufactured crises. Lily's anxiety was suddenly an illness triggered by my existence. My grandmother might pass away if deprived of another family photograph. It was theater at scale, a coordinated attempt to make me feel small for my audacity. We adapted. Giovanni arranged for discreet security. Ethan's friend Adam found a local who knew how to keep gatecrashers away without making headlines. We double-checked guest lists and itineraries. Every attempt to rattle me only made the plan cleaner, more considered. They were trying to start a fire. We hardened our resolve into something impermeable. On the flight to Naples, I felt like someone who had been sleepwalking into small compromises and suddenly decided to walk into sunlight. The plane took off with Seattle shrinking under clouds and, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't fenced by their expectations. I read my vows, wrote new lines so my promises belong to us and not to anyone looking for reasons to be offended. The Amalfi does something to light that I've chased my whole career, the particular amber that makes ordinary edges sacred. That evening, standing on Giovanni's terrace with salt and vine scent in the air, I looked at Ethan and felt the world rearrange itself into the shape I'd always wanted: intimate, honest, chosen. My guests were people who'd cheered when a client cried in front of me, who'd seen the way I coaxed real smiles from tired relatives. No one there was there because of obligation. We told the story we wanted. The guitarist played a song that wasn't a wedding march but a memory. I walked toward Ethan barefoot on cool stone. I didn't ask anyone else to make my story true. I simply stopped asking permission to exist in the foreground. The ceremony was all the things that a life built on self-effacement had never been: unashamed and uncluttered. The photographer friends I'd chosen moved like we'd always been collaborators, no posing, just noticing. The light did the rest. An image James took that night did something small and then something enormous. He uploaded a frame, a candid of Ethan and me in profile, hands joined, Jasmine framing us like a private coronation. It got shared. Then another account picked it up. Then a magazine asked permission. Comments grew into conversations. People wrote about how the photo looked like permission to be seen, to create, to claim joy for yourself. Within hours, the image had cracked a seam in the world my family had tried to stitch me into. I watched the notifications like someone watching a sunrise. Praise from colleagues I'd respected for years, messages from strangers who'd been waiting for someone to stop apologizing for themselves, invitations that suddenly had the weight of proof. The thing my parents had feared most wasn't that I would ruin their plans. It was that I would prove them wrong. That silence would be broken not by cruelty, but by being undeniably, beautifully myself. Lily texted after her wedding. There was a mix of things in her messages: murmured admiration and the thin, brittle sound of old defenses. She didn't ask to come to Italy. She didn't apologize. She sent sentences that tried to contain both pride and grievance. I read them in the small hours and felt a parental impulse toward pity float up and die. For years I'd been taught to compete for light on their terms. Now she was competing for it in a different contest. And she'd chosen one that depended on status, not on truth. When the inevitable messages from family arrived, some belligerently supportive, most quietly envious, I let them inhabit a different life. Their opinions were their own. They could hold them and carry them like the brittle heirlooms they'd been passing down. I would not be the person who softened her edges to keep them comfortable. There is a cruelty in erasing a child's achievement to save face. There is also a mercy in refusing to be complicit in that erasure. The internet did its thing. The photograph ran through feeds and pages until it accumulated momentum. A million views, articles, commentary, the kind of validation that isn't the same as your father's nod but has its own brutal honesty. Suddenly editors were calling. A documentary director wanted to follow my work for a year. Brides reached out to book me because they'd seen not just a picture but a way of living that felt honest. My inbox, which had been a polite trickle, became a river of people who wanted authenticity over spectacle. It was vindication in a form I had never expected. Not a dramatic confrontation staged in the foyer of a Miami ballroom, but a quiet, undeniable flourishing of the life I had chosen. My parents' veto had been an attempt to keep me boxed. My wedding was not a middle finger. It was a mirror held up to the life I'd built despite them. When you spend a lifetime being told you are too much, the most devastating revenge is to be everything you are without apology. Months later, I stood in a crowded room accepting an award for wedding photography. I looked out at faces, clients who trusted me with their vulnerable moments, colleagues who'd become collaborators, the young photographers I now mentored. I spoke about frames and truth, about the cruelty of being minimized and the responsibility of artists to hold space. I told the small version of the story everyone wanted: the broken mug, the call, the villa on the Amalfi. I didn't indulge in gossipy malice. That wasn't the point. The point was that when people try to make you smaller, that's precisely when you must stand tallest. After the award, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She reminded me of myself at 22, hungry, tentative, waiting for permission that had never been coming. She said she'd been following me since the image went viral. "You made me stop apologizing for wanting to be seen," she said. I held her hand and told her something I should have heard at 12, "Your light doesn't dim others. It creates space." I started a foundation, because pride without purpose is vanity. We funded small grants for photographers whose families refused to believe in their art, offered mentorship and legal advice for artists facing professional sabotage by kin, helped connect creatives with communities that valued them. The work was practical and small, and it lit other lives in ways the viral image could never have. People asked me if I regretted anything: my words, my timing, the way I'd kept plans secret. There were softer regrets, the way certain phone lines remained cold, the ache of childhood that never fully goes away. But regret and revenge are not the same thing. Revenge, for me, was not a plot or a public humiliation. It was a life turned in my favor, a day composed of everything I loved, shot the way I would shoot any client who deserved my full attention. It was the ultimate refusal to shrink. Once, in a drawer I'd cleared out, I found my 12-year-old self holding a trophy, staring at the camera like it was a window to a life. I placed that photograph on my studio wall and left it there. It no longer felt like evidence of a wound. It felt like part of the archive that made me whole. The people who tried to write me into a smaller story could keep their version. I had written my own. If there is a moral to this, I suppose there's one that would fit neatly into a script for the kind of family drama my parents adore. When you are told to step back, step forward. When you are told to shrink, become the skyline. The quiet revenge that felt best was never loud. It was simply becoming untouchable through work, through love, through creating a life that did not ask permission. Months later, Lily texted again. Her words were catalogued somewhere between apology and awe. She admitted that when she looked at the photo of our wedding, she saw me, the real me, and that it had made something in her ache. We did not reconcile fully. Some family stories mend slowly, stitched with time and honest conversations. Some people remain cast members in each other's dramas. I learned to love the people who loved me, and to let those who wouldn't, stay comfortably in their roles. I tell this not as a celebration of collapse but as a map. If you've been told you are too bright, too loud, too much, you might try the opposite of what they want, not revenge that hurts, but revenge that thrives. Build quietly, love fiercely, and create a life so beautiful and so true that it cannot be erased by anyone else's petty story. When I look at that Amalfi print now, it still takes my breath. The jasmine frames us. The Mediterranean bleeds gold into the horizon. My hands hold his. My face is unshadowed. For the first time, the photograph is not evidence of achievement to be defended. It is a quiet ledger of a life lived on purpose. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't land with a shout. It lands with a full, unashamed life.